This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
Indyliveradio.
Now it's the Yes Group Spotlight Show. Which Yes Group will be stepping into the spotlight this week?
Good morning, you're listening to Indyliveradio. It's Monday the 19th of July, just after 11 o'clock. My name's Valerie Gold and I'm introducing today's edition of the Yes Group Spotlight Show. This is a show where we feature recordings of meetings that you may have missed, and it gives you a second chance to listen in to meetings held by Yes Groups up and down the country. And today's recording is from last month, and it's of a meeting that was hosted by a group that Marlene Halliday and I are both members of here in Glasgow, Yes Glasgow North West. The guest speaker was the always interesting and inspiring Gordon MacIntyre Kemp, the CEO of Believe in Scotland and also Business for Scotland. And Gordon was talking on the subject of the Wellbeing Economy and winning IndyRef 2. The Wellbeing Economy, winning IndyRef 2, guest speaker Gordon MacIntyre Kemp, and we'd like to thank Yes Glasgow North West for allowing us to record the meeting and broadcast it on Indyliveradio here for you today. Welcome everybody. Welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Valerie Gold and I'm not going to say very much apart from maybe helping with the Q&A later on. I'm going to hand over in a moment to Geraldine Houston, because Geraldine is the driving force behind this meeting. She came back very excited about a meeting she'd been to in Believe in Scotland that she'd heard, and she was very inspired, which is good at this time because I think some of us, there's a lot of negativity around, and I think sometimes we can get a little jaded. So it was absolutely brilliant to see Jen so fired up, and she immediately arranged for Gordon MacIntyre Kemp to come and speak to us, which we're delighted. And the title of tonight's meeting is The Wellbeing Economy and Winning IndyRef 2. What is not to like there? So I'm going to pass over to Geraldine now to introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. So we at Yes Glasgow North West are, as Valerie said, absolutely delighted to be able to welcome Gordon MacIntyre Kemp as our guest speaker tonight. As I'm sure you will all know, Gordon is CEO of Business for Scotland, which was hugely influential in the 2014 IndyRef campaign. More recently, Gordon and the Business for Scotland team have founded Believe in Scotland, an initiative that aims to answer questions people might have about Scottish independence in easy to understand format. They have brought us the hugely informative Scotland the Brief book and Scotland the Brief mini book, and have partnered with the national newspaper in a campaign aiming to convert undecided or soft no voters, and have had several high profile billboard campaigns, which I'm sure we've all seen, very impressive around the place. They have supported and are continuing to support, most importantly, local Yes groups with campaign materials, books, leaflets, posters and such like. And I hear there are big plans for mass targeting canvassing like days away in the hopefully not too distant post-pandemic future, which we'll all look forward to. We're going to hear tonight from Gordon about wellbeing economics and why it must sit at the heart of the case for independence. And then after that, as Valerie said, we're going to have a Q&A session and hopefully hear some of Gordon's thoughts on the when and the how of the next independence referendum. And most importantly, how to win it this time. So everybody sit back, make yourselves comfy. Without any more prattling from me, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest speaker for tonight, Gordon MacIntyre Kemp.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. Delighted to be here. It's interesting because always if I'm doing talks around the country, quite often there's a drive away, sometimes there's overnight stays and all that sort of thing. But this is actually one that I would be able to do and just walk home from anyway, no matter where it was, because I live in the West End in Jordan Hill anyway, which is why I couldn't say no, because Geraldine knows where I live just around the corner from her. So she'd be up the door going, why'd you say no? But no, I'm delighted to also know so many of you personally as well. So I know I'm going to be in a tough time for questions tonight, but I'll look forward to that later. So yeah, basically there's two things that Geraldine asked me to talk about. One was the well-being economy, which is really all about how we're trying to lead the discussion on creating a new economic case for independence. That is new case because of Brexit and because of COVID. Everything has to change. And the thing is that we've got an opportunity now to understand that the old economic system doesn't work. It wasn't working. It was creating mass inequality. The rich were getting richer, the poor were getting poorer, and that only ever ends one way throughout history with total economic collapse. We've also got issues around climate change, which is already making major economic impacts in South America and Africa. And it's going to make even bigger impacts on Western economies in the future as well. So we can't go back to normal after Brexit and COVID lockdowns because normal wasn't working and normal isn't an option. So we've got to rethink economics. And I think that's a huge opportunity for Scotland because as we actually consider what sort of country we want to live in, what sort of emphasis we want, what sort of ethics do we want in our economic systems, as we're actually not starting from a blank sheet of paper, but sort of starting from a blank sheet of paper, we get to actually ask the nation what sort of country they want. What are our goals and aspirations? What are our needs, our own individual needs? And how can we actually fit all of that into a way forward, you know, on our socio-economic strategy? So well-being is a term which kind of replaces both capitalism and socialism. Now, if you think about capitalism, socialism, left and right, that's the prism through which we view politics and economics from last century. It's not going to work this century. In fact, it was from the century before, so it was already outdated last century. And my view is that capitalism and socialism are both dead because you can't have a strong economy without a strong society, and you can't have a strong society without a strong economy. And if you have a situation, which is what we do in politics, where we have, in Westminster, for instance, we have a right-wing government, goes along for a few years, doesn't invest in society, and then, you know, the economy booms for a short period of time because of tax incentives, those sort of things, but the society starts to fall apart. You end up with a boom and bust, and then we swing the pendulum over to the left and we elect a more left-wing government, and the left-wing government starts to reinvest in society, starts to bring up benefits, etc., like that, and starts to put back to work, etc., policies in place. But they don't understand the business end of the economy. And so basically we have society build up and the business end of the economy collapses, and everyone's sort of, we're going backwards and forwards. And it's, what's that saying that, the definition of stupidity is making the same mistake over and over again. Well, my entire lifetime we've been making that mistake. I think for, you know, a lot longer than that beforehand as well. And some people thought the answer was the middle, you know, which is a fudge on every level, and it just doesn't work. It's called the Liberal Party, Liberal Democratic Party, and nobody votes for them. So it's not about ending the swing of the pendulum by keeping it in the middle. It's about elevating our thinking. It's about understanding why we form societies in the first place, why we form economies, why economies exist, what the purpose of those economies are. And so basically, we've got this chance with independence, coinciding with COVID, coinciding with Brexit, to say, okay, we need to redesign, rethink absolutely everything. We can't go back to normal because normal wasn't working. So how do we build back better? And that's what well-being economics is all about. So I'm going to take you through a wee presentation. I'm going to share my screen and take you through a wee presentation on well-being economics, and then we'll throw it open to questions. And I'll answer any questions. And it doesn't need to be on well-being economics. Make the first few on that. Hopefully you'll be interested enough to ask some questions on it. And if you've got other economic ideas that you've been hearing about, there are groups talking about different ideas, different approaches, etc., you want to question me on that, I'm happy to answer questions on those as well. And then we'll just have a chat. I'll try and answer as frankly and honestly as I can on questions about anything from the timings of the next referendum, which Geraldine wanted me to talk about as well, right through to, you know, any political situation that you want to understand, not because I understand everything, it's just that I'm totally and utterly immersed in this and I speak to people day in, day out, so I might have a little something to contribute. So I'm going to share my screen now and take you through a quick presentation on well-being economics. So basically, yeah, well-being. It's about a model for infinite prosperity. It's about doing things radically differently. It's about rethinking economics and understanding that we can no longer miss the fact that the economy and society are one. They're interwoven, and you can't have success in one area without success in the other area. But first, let's talk about what it means to independence, because here we've got a poll which is done. There's been multiple polls, and they've all come out roughly with the same area, or same number, which basically say that there's up to 75% of Scots would vote for independence if we made the right economic case. Now, the right economic case isn't about better explaining why GERS doesn't actually mean what the situation would be in an independent Scotland. What the right economic case means is something that everyone can look at and go, that's the sort of country I want to be part of. That is the sort of approach to running our economy and running our society that inspires me. And currently we don't have that. And the Sustainable Growth Commission certainly doesn't inspire an awful lot of people. So, but how do you find, when you have people divided by left and right, more to the centre left in Scotland, England's a centre right country, we're a centre left country. So how do you inspire people when those people are all right across the political spectrum? Well, there is an answer, which is that well-being economics appeals to people on both sides of the political spectrum. When you explain it to them that that left and right can't work on their own, that you've got to have, sometimes you've got to hold what seem to be completely contradictory economic ideas in your head at the same time. An idea from the far left and an idea from the far right might be together the only thing that will ever actually make the economy work. When you explain that to people, a light bulb goes on in a lot of people's heads, and they realize that they've been led up the garden path down political tribalism to try and make you vote for one political party or another for so long that we've actually forgotten to take a step back and actually ask ourselves, well, how does the economy work? How does society work? And one of the things that I think people within the Yes movement misunderstand is just where people sit in terms of their thinking on independence. Now, this one in particular is from a poll that we did in April this year, and it also shows you that 75%, is it achievable? Well, this poll shows from the green on the right-hand side is the number 10, those most committed to independence, to 0, those most committed to the union. As you can see, this poll shows a significant lead, but there's at least 30% in the middle that could go either way. And that 30% would take, if you can win them all, that 30% takes yes to 70%. But you could lose them all with the wrong economic argument as well. And right now, I think we've got no economic argument, because let's just do something similar to what the UK does is not an economic argument when the UK has been collapsing for years under generations of economic mismanagement. I think I'll draw your attention also to this and to understand, because a lot of people think that yes, people who decide that they support yes. So when you see a poll that says we're at 55% yes to go, that's 55% of the population are like me. They're not. If you're a 10, then 75% of the population aren't like you. There's a lot of people around 6 and 7 and 8 who could be persuaded against independence with the wrong economic argument or with enough scaremongering. That's what happened last time round. So we have to go at the pace of the people in 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. They will dictate when we have the next referendum, and they're not going to be ready until after COVID. They're not going to be ready until we've actually presented a better economic case. And when we've done that and COVID is clear, then we can start thinking about when we actually have a referendum. Last year we did a survey. Scotianomics is the think tank arm of Business for Scotland. It does all of our research, but also consults, which is why we, with private clients, which is why we sort of spun it out. We did a bit of research on well-being economics, where we actually looked around the world, all the well-being economic policies that were being put in play by governments, and we mapped out what each well-being policy was, what the core of it was, where its ethics were, where its values were, and we came up with 17 core values of the well-being approach. And in a lot of these countries, it's just virtue signaling. There's no real move to actually moving away from capitalism to well-being, or socialism to well-being, wherever they started from, or democratic socialism, as some of them would call it, to well-being. There's no real move to that. It's a bit like the word progressive. And we thought, well, let's put it all together and let's say, well, if we actually listed right across the values, right across the field of policy, what would that actually look like? And how would people react if we said, this is where we think we should go? So the first thing that we actually put together was a question, which is overall attitude towards quality of life, fairness, happiness, and health are all economic outcomes that should be given equal weight to economic growth. And in Scotland, 78% of the population agreed with that. And I'd like to point out that the undecided are still left in here, so it's really about 86% if you take the undecided out. So it just goes to show just how many people would actually agree with that statement, which goes 100% in the opposite direction of the Conservative government's thinking, or even the Labour government's thinking, or any future Labour government's thinking, any recent Labour government's thinking on economics. But what really interested us was, when we actually asked that question, we broke it down in terms of age groups. We found that the group that was most keen on a well-being approach to economics was actually the 55s plus. So the group that is most opposed to independence is the one that feels it's got the most potentially to lose, because they were attacked by scaremongering because they read the press and don't get their information through other sources as easily. And you know, when we actually showed them all of the values, they said, yeah, that's the sort of country we want to leave our children behind. And we thought that was absolutely fascinating. So you've got a situation where well-being approach to economics, abandoning the Sustainable Growth Commission and not going way to the left, etc., but actually saying, look, this is what we're looking at. This is the values of the economic system we want to put in place. And when you do that, yes, there's a mass majority right across all age groups, but in almost in every area, the older folks bought into it more than anybody else. Overall attitudes towards, you cannot have this is the key saying, the key sort of slogan, if you like, you cannot have a thriving economy without a thriving society, and you can't have a thriving society without a thriving economy. And 72% said that matched their beliefs. They understood that you can't govern purely from the right or purely from the left. And I guess a lot of people understand that, but the political elites move to the centre to try and match that general truth within the population. But then they lost control during the financial crisis. They've not been able to cope with COVID very well, and therefore people have started to look outside the centre for more extreme politicians like Boris Johnson, like Trump, like many across the world. And it's interesting that the political elites who sit in the centre left or the centre right were just swept away in quite a lot of places, but in some places they're coming back. Didn't happen in Scotland. And it's an interesting view. Maybe it's because they're not independent, but it does appear that there are the actual broad church that the SNP used to represent held together much more, much better than the more narrower political parties in elections. So this one here actually shows that actual statement there. We looked at 2019 voting intentions from voters. So there's 1,000 people polled in this poll by panel base. And we found out that on that particular statement, that key understanding, Conservative voters came out top, joint top with Lib Dem voters. So we're finding a pattern here that shows massive support amongst Labour and SNP. We didn't do Green because Greens didn't stand candidates in 2019, or enough candidates to be statistically relevant to the survey in 2019. But we know that they're way behind us. Probably would come out top on every one if you could pull enough of them. But we actually found out that the older folks who were against independence were most aligned to the idea of well-being, and Conservatives and Lib Dems on many of the core ideas were also most aligned to the concepts of well-being. Conservatives less so on many of the other ones, more of the social ones, which you would expect, but still in every single area there was a Conservative majority for every single well-being approach. If we build society and our economy more successfully after coronavirus, we can create a new economic approach that will allow both our economy and our society to thrive and be more resilient in the face of economic crises. Again, 70% yes, only 11% no, still with undecideds in there. So again, you're talking 79, 80% if you move the undecideds either way. So basically, people across Scotland are crying out for a new approach to economics. They understand at their core that the old approach doesn't work. And there you can see, which I think is quite interesting, you expect the SNP and Labour to be high on that. But the Lib Dems were very, very strong on that too. But let's take a look at the Conservatives. And yeah, you'd actually maybe think that that is a little bit, I don't know, socialist, a bit more left-wing value, but they still buy into it in a majority of 52%. So 52 to 22%. So really, only about a third of Conservative voters disagree with this when you remove the undecideds. And that's when you start to realise that there is something that would appeal to that 75% that would actually vote for independence if we gave the right economic case. Ending poverty, inequality, unfairness, and increasing minimum wage and job security will boost the economy. So what we're saying is here that actually it's two sides of the same coin. If you end poverty, pay better pensions, for instance. If you maybe put basic income in place, if you end inequality and unfairness and increase the minimum wage so that people feel secure in their jobs, then the economy will be boosted. So this is a left followed by a right-wing goal, a left-wing value followed by a right-wing goal, if you like. And again, right across the board, there is significant support for this. And when the chief executive of the polling company was looking at this raw data, and I spoke to him on the phone as he was preparing the data for me, and he said, are the SNP and Labour voters exactly the same people in Scotland? And I said, yeah, pretty much, except for they vote for one party or another. They have almost identical views. And we find this throughout this poll, throughout all of the polls we do. And that's why so many Labour voters are now starting to vote for independence. Also, if you look at the tactical voting in Holyrood, and we actually match this to Holyrood voting intentions, or there is a future poll matched to the Holyrood voting intentions, you'd find that so many Labour unionists voted tactically in certain seats that you'll find there was a massive majority of those that did still vote Labour would support independence. And so, if they are really not voting Labour, the unionists are not voting Labour, they're voting Conservatives, then the Labour membership, or the Labour vote, not the membership, sorry, the Labour vote in Scotland is becoming pro-independence, and that's fascinating. So how does this all sort of fit together? And if you've read the book Scotland the Brief, you'll see the comparison that we do, the UK across all the different categories versus all of the Western and Northern European nations, and the UK comes out bottom on every single value. So there has to be a way to measure this, because it's a woolly idea about a nice way to run the country, unless there's a specific strategy behind it, unless there's a way to actually model the impacts of policies, etc. So we created that too. And this is, how do we elevate economics? And we basically looked, this is a few years old now, this piece of research. So I took sustainability, well-being, welfare and feelings of personal security, society indicators, things like the Gini coefficient, how long people live for, how healthy they stay, how long they're able to stay healthy enough to continue to work, those sort of things, and also some of those really hard GDP type figures in their economic performance. And we found out that small independent Denmark, or smaller independent Denmark, that doesn't have any of Scotland's economic assets, it has a little bit of oil and gas, but really struggled until it managed to carve out machine tools, chemical engineering, and pork, which you'll all know about as well, as the three sort of main industries that those were all invented, if you like, by Denmark, because they didn't have core industries to base their economy on after World War II. Denmark beats the UK, the big UK, on almost every factor except for natural resources, and that is because of Scotland is in the UK, and sustainability, and that's because Scotland is in the UK. You take Scotland out of the UK, it would only beat Denmark on one single factor, or economic factor, performance factor, which would be economic growth. Except this is pre-Brexit, and now Denmark beats it on every single factor. And that's the case when we measured every single small, independent Northern European nation. They destroy the UK in terms of economic performance. We are being held back by the UK. In terms of how it works into policies, this is a policy which we created, which is called Benefit Corporation Tax Credits. And you can go to the Scotianomics website, you can download these reports. I don't know how many pages they are, but 60 to 100 pages of these reports with lots of unique research in there from our research team. And basically, in a nutshell, what Benefit Corporation Tax Credits is we said, let's not reduce corporation tax, because companies don't pay it anyway. They offshore, they cheat in tax havens, etc. Let's not reduce it the way that the rest of the UK is. Let's actually say it's going to be 20%, which would scare the pants off of any big corporation if you say it's going to be 20%. But it's going to be 20% unless you have gender balance on your board, unless you pay the real living wage, unless you spend a certain percentage of your profits on research and development, unless you increase your exports, unless you hire unemployed people, unless you meet these pollution criteria, etc., etc. And so we created about 12 or 13 corporation tax credits that if you were a benefit to our society, if you were playing the game and pushing towards creating a well-being economics in Scotland by your corporate behaviour, then you'll end up paying less corporation tax than you do in England. And so there's actually tax cuts built into getting rid of inequality, hiring young people, increasing exports, etc., etc. So using corporate taxation to change corporate behaviours to fit with a well-being economic approach can be done. And if you've seen the S&P's Commission on Equality and Fairness, then you'll notice that this is in there, that using taxation to change behaviours is corporate behaviours is throughout that report, as are several of the well-being approaches. It actually says well-being economics is one of the chapters, and multiple ideas from Business for Scotland and Scotianomics are in there, including annual ground rent and discussion about raising pensions, which is not as high as we'd like it to raise, but we can get to that in questions if you like later. So basically, that's what I want to say about well-being as an approach. If you take well-being and say it's not socialism, it's not capitalism, it's a hybrid of the two, it's the only thing that will actually ever work and it will stop boom and bust, but it's also not just something we're trying to create in order to convince people for an independent Scotland, because independence is not an end in itself, it is a means to an end, and that end is a better Scotland, and the well-being approach is what delivers prosperity after independence. It delivers sustainability, environmental sustainability, creates the type of Scotland we all want to live in and doesn't leave anyone behind. So I think I'm going to leave it there, although I've got loads more information, although I did have something I was going to share with you, but I think of very quickly, I'll just run through, no, I won't run through, I'll just tell you what this says. So basically, localised decision-making. Who thinks that worked? Well, the Conservatives didn't, and the reason the Conservatives didn't is because they think all decision-making should be in London, but everyone else thinks that we should make decisions, not even in Holyrood, not even at council level, but at lower levels in communities. Does economic success being more equally shared result in better growth? That means higher quality growth, more sustainable growth? Yes, it does. Small businesses are the backbone, not large corporates. Small businesses, when a small business earns more money, it hires more people, it creates jobs. When a large corporate makes more money, it invests in robotics, it has automatic tills, it cuts jobs. So if you want to keep people working for longer, then spend your money on small businesses, but have an economy based on small businesses. In other words, Scottish businesses, not global corporates, etc. And once again, as you can see, younger people are motivated to vote by a wellbeing approach but older people are motivated to support a wellbeing approach. And so basically, we want to get 16 to 34-year-olds voting, and we want the over 55s. And by the way, the older they got, the more in support they got. So by the time you got to the 65 to 75, they were far higher than the 55 to 65 range in terms of their support as well. Austerity has failed, slowed the economy, harmed people and society, made the country more susceptible to economic and health crises. 64%, again with the undecideds in there. But we're going to have austerity forced upon us again by the Conservative government, because that's how they think about economics. And so that's soon going to start really playing in our favour as well. We can build back better. Yes, we can. 61% want to see us change the way we approach that. And the final thing I was going to share with you is just a bit of news, which you may have noticed already. We've run a crowdfunder, which is to raise money, which is going to be completely spent on campaigning for Believe in Scotland. All the wages, all the office costs, everything that we have as both Business for Scotland, as Scotianomics, and as Believe in Scotland are met by Business for Scotland donors and the revenues we make from events, when we can hold events. And so every single penny we've raised, all 129,000, it's actually about 131,400 now, will be spent on campaigning. More billboards, more books, more leaflets to go through people's doors, materials, canvases, things for leaflets. We're going to print 1 million leaflets, and we're going to create campaigning videos, and we're going to take the fight to the unionists and match them pound for pound. But that doesn't mean we're going to be equal to them, because the things they're spending their money on are completely and utterly wasted. The billboards they put up were awful. So the messages we're putting out there are plain and simple, and they're getting through, and when we test them, they're effective. And so we're also going to be spending this money having a national day of action, where we want to get 125 local Yes groups to have a mass day of action, to hold street stalls, barbecues, bake-offs, you name it, whatever. And let's also deliver on that day 100,000 leaflets around Scotland, and I hope that your group will take part in that. And I think as we were mentioning before, we do want to actually blitz some towns in the Borders and in Moray, and give them a 28-page copy of our Open Minds and Independence articles, which will be printed in the National on that day. So there'll be 28,000 copies of the National with that in printed that day, and then we'll have another 50,000 copies of the pull-out, which won't be branded National, we've branded Open Minds, and we can drop that through letterboxes and strong no areas and get the message across to people that independence will be good for them, and it'll have the well-being message in there as well. And then we'll go back a week later, knock all the doors and talk to them and actually say, what did you think of this? And let's have a sensible adult conversation about independence, and we'll know whether it works or not. So what's the difference between Believe in Scotland and Business for Scotland? Well, first of all, we've got the ideas, and we don't complain, we campaign, and enough people, and I'm quite humbled by this, enough people have backed us and said, yes, we want to back that organisation's ideas, and we want to back them supporting a grassroots movement to deliver independence, and that's what we're going to try and do. Great. So now for any questions.
That was absolutely brilliant, Gordon. So much food for thought there. There's some really surprising things for campaigners in terms of the way that the opinion split according to party allegiance. I wonder if anybody has a question for Gordon.
Basic question that I think so much else hangs on is how the devil do we get rid of the growth report?
Well, I think that's simple. Basically, the growth report, if you think the growth report was good in its day, that it reached out to Conservatives, well, I'm talking the general you. But if people think it was good in its day and it reached out to Conservatives and it sort of made, calmed the horses, etc., then fair enough. I'm not going to argue with that. But it wasn't inspiring, and I don't think we need to calm the horses, because we're never going to get that 24-25% that are on zero, who are highly conservative and highly right-wing. They're never going to agree, because they are completely institutionalised. They think Westminster and the House of Lords and all these sort of things, the royal family, you know. So this is the thing, that the royal family getting involved in the independence campaign will appeal only to the hardcore supporter. It won't make a difference to anyone else. The thing is, the world has changed. Brexit's happened. COVID's happened. It's been taken over by events. So basically, I've been talking to the Scottish Government at CABSEC level, and actually saying, we need to replace this, we need to change this, we need to take a different approach. I've given them the reports, I've given them the surveys, etc. And for Kate Forbes to have been given economy and finance, and for her to write her job description and write in her job description Wellbeing Economics as one, for the first time ever it's ever been written in a job description, I think that they're listening. I know they're listening because you know, rather than being kept at an arm's length and then listen to the CBI the whole time, you know, we can now send emails and get quick answers from ministers and all those sort of things, you know. And Business for Scotland is rated alongside the CBI, the SCDI, the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, and the Institute of Directors as one of the key influencing organisations. We have our own account handlers for the Scottish Government. So we know they're listening, and they know they think we're credible, and we know that, and I think they're still listening too much to the CBI. It's incredible that they even get in the door. But you know, how many time meetings do you have to have with Scottish ministers to tell them you think the minimum wage is too high? I mean, you know, it only takes one meeting, doesn't it? So basically, it's not about getting rid of it. It's about re-engineering and rethinking economics, given the new reality we've got right now, and automatically, therefore, what we come up with will be vastly different and more inspiring than the Sustainable Growth Commission, and therefore it will be consigned to history, but not in a bad way. I'm not going to sit here and slag it off. There's too much negativity within the independence movement already.
Well, I hope it doesn't take too long, Gordon, because I'll be 80 next month.
Well,
I want to see it.
We are going to have a referendum, not before you're 80, I'm afraid, but certainly before you're 82. Good.
I'll try and survive till then. Thank you.
That's the positivity we're looking for.
We have two people with their hands up, Rosalind and then Geraldine. Can I come to Rosalind first, please? Rosalind, if you'd like to unmute yourself. And thanks very much for answering Pat's question, Gordon.
Gordon, do you not think that even the Tories and Labour are going to say, yes, we think a wellbeing economy is a good idea as well?
But they're in no position
they'll talk a good game.
Well, Labour might do, but they're in no position to do anything about it. I mean, literally, they're like 12 or 14% behind in the polls. And if this continues, then Boris is going to call a snap general election next year. You know, so basically, it's like, will Labour say, yes, we'd like to do this? Well, basically, in order to say, yes, we'd like to do this, just with federalism, you have to say, well, why would you like to do that? The answer is, well, because the current economic system isn't working. So the nationalists are right. The independence would be better. You know, well, why do you want federalism? Why do you want to bring in Devo Max? Well, because running Britain from Westminster doesn't work. So you admit the union doesn't work. You know, let them, because it's self-defeating. If Labour do that, then their own members will move towards the SNP or towards, there's no point moving to the SNP, there's not going to be any more elections except for the council ones next year. So, but they'll move towards independence, because the vast majority of Labour voters are open to independence. About a third of those, or about 33 to 34% of those that voted Labour in 2019 support independence. And like I say, if you take all of those thousands of voters in places like Helensburgh that voted tactically for not Helensburgh is a bad one, so it was the Conservatives, but in these areas where the Labour voters voted tactically for Conservatives, take them out, those that are left, you'll find they're 50-60% pro-Indy. So Labour's actually heading to a massive fight amongst itself as to whether or not to support an independent referendum, and then even possibly whether or not that they should actually come out for independence. And with a well-being approach, then suddenly a lot of them are going to start going, yeah, actually independence is a good idea. So, you know, it's never going to be implemented unless we have independence. The rest of the UK does not answer the following questions in the same way as Scotland does. We know because we polled 1,000 people in the rest of the UK as well, and Scotland is miles ahead of them in accepting these principles.
What I meant though was the Tories lie about talk a good game, and they'll say we also believe in well-being. What we're doing is for the well-being. It's lying. It's not what they're doing, but I can see them just saying we also believe in this.
And that 25 to 30% of the population that were on the 0 and 1 will believe them, but nobody else will. Politicians will always lie. You just have to sound more convincing and have a better argument, and I think we do.
My buddy from Kelvin, Ken Andrews, got his hand up there.
Oh, thank you, Valerie. And sorry, I thought I was elbowing my way in there. So thank you for that, Gordon. In terms of a lot of the as I see it anyway, the way that the Conservatives and Labour have tried to run our economy, a lot of it is very much almost like Daily Mail based, and it's like, look what we're doing, look how fantastic this is. We're constantly increasing your asset values, principally the value of your house. And I suppose as I see it, a sort of well-being economy kind of would sort of detach away from that concept of constantly increasing asset values, which I personally believe has been enormously harmful to our economy and people's sense of well-being. And I just wonder how you make that argument to get people to understand that constantly rising asset values or the value of the house is actually a destructive thing and not a constructive thing. And so I'd be interested to maybe know your thoughts on that.
Well, the issue around rising asset values, yes, the cost of houses now is ridiculous. So you look at the well-being approach and how many young people said they would vote for it, said they supported it. You realise that's because they're looking at the world now. They're the first generation that's not going to earn more than the parents. Many of them might never get jobs. How do you get on if you do get a job and you're working for Deliveroo, it's not 10 times salary to get a flat in the West End of Glasgow. It's 50 times salary, and no one's going to lend to you. So yes, asset values or house prices in particular have actually increased to the extent that you can't bring people in at the bottom ladder anymore. So what do? Well, you have to have a massive house building plan, affordable housing, affordable flats. They're going to be in the outskirts. You probably need a new town or two. But also you need to be saying to people, actually, it's possibly more affordable for us to actually try and get young people to go back to rural areas, because the Scottish Government's free university education brought people in from rural areas. They got degrees in things that weren't necessarily able to give them jobs in rural areas, so they didn't go back. And so basically, that's one of the reasons that rural areas are so conservative and so anti-independence, because it's full of old folks who own their houses outright and are interested in asset values and are also interested in their pensions because they're not selling houses, they need to live off a pension, etc. So how do we, if we actually said, okay, fine, let's build a whole load of affordable houses, that wouldn't actually necessarily reduce dramatically the top end of the market. So I don't think it's a negative there. So I don't think that you would actually upset people by actually building houses to get young people on the property ladder. In fact, in the end, that would increase asset values, or at least make asset values more sustainable down the line, as younger people got older and then became able to move up the property ladder, etc. But in terms of the thinking around investment asset values, and that brings us to the question around pensions, for instance. So pensions, we have the worst pension in developed world, the worst state pension in developed world in the UK. A lot of pensioners live in poverty. And when I talk about this, quite often I see right-wing economists. I was on a talk just last week and a right-wing economist said, yes, Gordon, but they have private pensions, and private pensions brings it up, brings the average up. Yeah, it does, because some people are making an absolute mint out of private pensions because they could afford to, because they were paid an awful lot of money and because they had good private pensions. If you didn't have a good private pension, then you're living on £134.20 a week. And I've tried to think about that. That's less than just one of my family's 2 Sainsbury's shops. So it's ridiculous to think that people can actually then pay any mortgage or rent in particular, or heat their homes, etc., on that amount of money. And there are other benefits. There are other benefits, but they're also stopping the TV license for over 75s. I can't remember the age group that they stopped it for, etc. But so there are other things that compensate to a certain extent, pension or credits, etc. But overall, the UK governments of both red and blue colours have kept state pensions deliberately low in order to force those that can afford to take out private pensions, and that forces them to put their money into the City of London and increase asset prices, which then they go out and they buy shares. The big corporates become bigger, and the big corporates shut down small companies and take over small companies, and it basically you end up within your regions of the UK, no headquarters, all your headquarters down in London near the financiers, etc. So yeah, it's been tremendously harmful approach, and it's been followed by Labour. Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling in particular did the most amount of banking deregulation to allow that to happen. And so basically we need to re-engineer society and actually spread wealth more fairly, because if you increase pensions, I would increase pensions to £175. No, £185, sorry, is what I actually came to as the idea. So raise pensions to £185, just slightly more than £50 a week. And if you do that, then pensioners go out and spend the money. They'll spend it on, new pair of shoes, new coats. They'll spend it on presents for the grandkids. They'll spend it on food. They'll heat their homes, etc. That money goes straight back into the economy, and you therefore get the VAT back on it. But also, the local shopkeeper then goes and hires more people and then pays their wages, and you get some of that tax back as well. So you actually get most of that extra pension back. If, however, you create new money and give it to the banks and say to the banks, so give everybody a COVID loan rather than the government giving you the money direct, the banks then profit. That increases the asset values. The banks make money, but nobody else does. So we've got our thinking completely wrong, and Labour has also always had its thinking completely wrong. They started to change the thinking with Corbyn, but as was inevitable, and I wrote about this in the National column, as soon as he won, he was never going to be Prime Minister.
Alan? Very simple one, Gordon. At some point, you have to engage with the politicians. How do you get the Scottish Government working alongside you on this?
Well, like I say, we are actually registered with the Scottish Government as a partner business group. We do talk to ministers on a regular basis. I have hour-long Zooms with cabinet secretaries, etc. That isn't a problem. If not I personally, but if Business for Scotland wants to have a meeting with a minister within a couple of weeks, we get that meeting. If we want a minister to come and talk to our one of our lunches, etc., and engage with their members, we get that. So, and we put reports through. We don't always agree with them. Often we don't agree with them. Sometimes we've actually managed to force some changes. Years ago, business rates, we actually came out against the business rates and forced them to review their approach to business rates. But that ended up. That started because that ended up with us actually complaining about the Scottish Government on the front page of the Scotsman, which, it's funny, sometimes they don't listen and sometimes you have to go down that route as well, but that's rare we do. So they are listening, we have contact with them, and I think a lot of people say, oh, the Scottish Government don't listen, and they don't listen to what we're saying. The people who are saying that within the Yes movement are people that don't know how to lobby properly and don't know how to build those relationships, and tend to write blogs that ruin relationships with the Scottish Government. And we don't do that because we're political party neutral. And so, yeah, I think we've got a good relationship, and I think they're beginning to listen. Although it's been very frustrating, I must say. I always say to people that I campaign for independence for free, but I get paid for dealing with the SNP.
So on that note, can we move on to Graham McKellar, please?
Legally, does the Scottish Government have the power as things stand just now, without referring to Westminster? Do they have the powers to levy a land tax in Scotland? Or is that something that they would have to pass Westminster?
Yeah, no, they don't have the powers to levy it. They've got some powers of landfill tax, etc., but they don't have the ability to change the entire tax system to a annual ground rent and land tax. No, that would only come with independence.
Okay, right, fine.
It's actually Lynn Cochrane next. Thank you.
I've got the book on land tax right in front of me.
Colin, you there?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Valerie, and thanks very much, Gordon, for your fantastic talk so far. I wanted to change the question a wee bit because I've been having to read up and stuff and learn more, and it's terrifying what I've been reading, right? Back in 2015 at COP21, the Paris Agreement said everybody agreed to pursue methods to hold the average global warming at 1.5 degrees centigrade, okay? Sometime within the next 5 years, there's a 40% chance we'll hit that already. That's already here. 1.5 is a carefully chosen number because that means it's hell for leather after that. There's irreversible damage will start to be done. How's that going to affect well-being economy? How's that going to affect politics? Because our response to that has to be overwhelming. The pandemic is going to look like a picnic compared to this stuff. And the pandemic was horrendous, as we all know. How's that going to affect our plans, our whole thing about economics? Is it all up in the air? What happens?
Environmental sustainability, Colin, is at the heart of wellbeing economics. You cannot sustain the well-being of society if your climate is changing dramatically. And, people sort of joke and say, oh, well, it'd be nice to have some sunny days. Well, actually what's going to happen is, a lot more serious than that across the UK. But actually, if you look at areas such as South America, there's already hundreds of thousands of people displaced and marching towards America. And America's answer is, let's build a wall, but keep on polluting. They don't understand that these are not economic migrants. These are people trying to feed their families. There's a world of difference, between someone that thinks, I'll move there to get a bit more money than I can make, and someone that's thinking, if I don't do this dangerous trip and put my life in the hands of gangsters to cross the American border, then my family's going to starve to death as things are going. So we're already seeing climate change impacting certain parts of the world. You're certainly going to see extremism as an answer, terrorism as an answer in parts of Africa in particular. But because we're sitting here nicely, cosseted in the West End of Glasgow, and we haven't been out of our houses for quite some time, we're not really that affected by it. But looking to the future and looking at the risk that we face from this, it is the single largest risk to the economy. And anyone that thinks we can carry on as normal and that we can just get back to normal and our economies will continue for the next 50 years growing the way they have been growing is completely out of touch with reality. There are major changes coming for all of us in the way we behave, the way we consume. Even the idea of the clothes we buy, we're going to have to change. I buy second-hand clothes. I buy clothes that I know will last, non-fashion items. I know you may have noticed I don't wear fashionable clothes. I'm out of fashion. But I buy things like so. I remember wee Ginger Doug picked up my coat once at a meeting in a pub, and he sort of carried it over and he looked at it and he said, I've forgotten what the make was. Oh, a big wax jacket that I had, Barber. And he said, I might have known the really expensive Barber would be yours. And I said, yeah, I bought it second hand for £10 and I've had it for 25 years and I've refitted it 3 times. He went, okay, good. So and we then had a conversation about all his clothes being second hand as well. We're all going to have to think about how we reuse, and it's no longer a slogan, it's going to be an absolute reality. And also we look at the pandemic. I can't say this is the case, but as the world heats up, viruses will behave radically differently. And you will see more opportunities for pandemics to come out of global warming as a result as well. It's already happening in Siberia. So yeah, I agree. It's a huge issue, and well-being has environmental sustainability at the heart of it.
Well, it's the biggest issue in the last couple of million years, perhaps. But how can we think about a well-being economy when that's hanging over hanging over us.
Well, because
it's not hanging over us now. It is here. It started.
Because every single element of the wellbeing economy, every policy within the wellbeing economy has to tick the box of environmental sustainability. There is, and yes, that does have issues.
We just need to get all the other democracies and all the other countries in the world doing the same thing.
Well, we need to lead the way. We need to lead the way. And
well, that's what it's coming to.
Independence gives us the opportunity to lead the way and to shine a light for the rest of the world to follow on environmental sustainability.
COP26, we really need to be out there making the case for well-being in general across the planet, because there maybe isn't another way.
Absolutely.
Maggie Chetty.
Hi. There's a narrative that the SNP leadership are quite comfortable with devolution and not very prepared to fight for independence. If this is the case, how do we pep up the SNP leadership motivation for independence? Because none of the things we've talked about will shift unless we have that drive for positive moving forward.
I'm aware of that narrative, and frankly, I think it's not. The SNP leadership are completely committed to independence. The difference isn't whether people are committed to independence and whether they want independence. It's when they believe it is best to move forward in order to win and guarantee independence. And there are people who say we should do it now, we should just dissolve the union and declare UDI, etc. And I understand their sympathy, I sympathise with their frustrations, I really do, because I'm completely committed to independence. But I don't want to do it right away. I don't want to try and hold a referendum in the middle of the Olympics, or I don't want to hold a referendum during the Queen's Jubilee, or during the COVID hold a referendum during COVID. And so basically what you've got is you've got Nicola Sturgeon, who went a bit gung-ho in 2017 and declared there will be an independence referendum in front of the podium at Butte House, etc. And then we had Theresa May call a snap election. And because the SNP had said we're going to have a referendum, but hadn't built the case first before announcing that, they didn't have all the arguments ready. So they said we can't fight this election on independence. We have to say it's not about independence. And so independence supporters went, you can't offer us an independence referendum and then back off it. And the Conservatives went, they're really weak on this. Let's polarise the unionist vote around us. And they lost, 17 seats, etc. So once bitten, twice shy. They are more nervous than, say, Alba people are. But at the end of the day, are they too nervous? Are they too slow? Could they have gone faster? Could they have done more already? Yes, they could have done. But could we hold a referendum this year? No, I think if the question you want answered is it still possible from 50-50 for us to lose, then the answer is let's hold a referendum right away or this year. But if your answer is when can we guarantee, because we're not going to get a third shot, when can we guarantee we can win? Then I don't think we're talking until we're talking about between autumn 2022 is the earliest, to autumn 2023 is the latest. That's when we're going. We're going in that time, folks. So let's start getting ready for it. The SNP is committed to it. And if the SNP decided to go, we are, happy with independence, without independence, etc., then the SNP would cease to exist the next day. So even if anybody out there thinks that Nicola Sturgeon is only interested in her own career depends on calling an independence referendum in the next 2 years. So that's it. We need to get ready for it. And so therefore I don't give any credence to the people that say that the leadership of the SNP do not want independence. But I do accept that they're a lot more nervous and a lot slower at going after independence than a lot of the people at that number 1 or number 10 on the scale would like them to be. And that's where the disconnect within the movement has got, because they're not very good at communicating to those people. SNP is terrible at communicating to the Yes movement.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks, Maggie, as well for your question. We have 3 more questions, and I think we won't take any more now. I think that will round us off nicely if Gordon's got enough time to answer those. The remaining 3 questioners are Jim Stamper, Alison Johnston, and Mary McCabe. So could I go to Jim Stamper first, please?
Do you agree that extra financial flexibility gained by the early introduction of a Scottish currency could help the well-being economy?
It depends on what you mean by the early introduction. So, I am in favour of a Scottish currency, and that is the position of Business for Scotland. We believe we should do it at the point that it is beneficial, most beneficial for Scotland to bring in that currency. And therefore, you have to have the maximum amount of flexibility on your currency stance. So, for instance, if we say that on day one of independence, we're going to launch our own currency, then you might say that gives us better monetary policy flexibility to create new money, etc. Well, yes, you do, but also, you know, the ability to create new money and put it into the economy without creating inflation is based upon the valuation. You know, if your currency is free floating, etc., it's based upon the valuation the currency markets put on that. And I think you've also got a situation where, you know, so would they believe that a country launching a new currency who immediately started printing billions and putting it into the economy, would they actually trust that currency? No, they wouldn't. And because they think about economics maybe differently to what we might want to think about economics, then, you know, it's not necessary. The full flexibility would not come straight away. The other thing is, and this is where you've got to look at people who are interested in economics, and they talk about MMT, and they talk about the benefits of your own currency, etc. And they talk about how modern monetary policy means you can print as much money as you want, because look what the Conservatives have done with PPE, you know, just printing money for it, etc. And all of those things are true, and they were true when the financial crash happened, because the money went to the asset holders, it went to the banks, it went to the finance markets, it didn't come to the people. Therefore, the people didn't go out. We bailed out the banks, we bailed out corporations, and with loans, low interest loans to businesses and furlough, we didn't give individuals money, the government gave companies money. So the money has not been increasing. The flow of money to people has not increased, and that's why it hasn't created inflation. But if you're launching a new currency and you think that you can just immediately start controlling things, that you just turn left and turn right and put the brakes on or accelerate, and that's you in control of it, then you're not. There's a lot of other issues that you've got to understand. And one of them is trade with the rest of the UK. So we've got this country with 60 million people in it right next to us, and we are their most important export market. Nobody buys cheese and Carling Lager, etc., other than us and Wales, basically. So, you know, they can't go and sell it to America and Europe. They need us as much as we need them, but we do sell a lot to them. And it's going to take time for us to sell to other countries and increase our exports to other countries, but we will do. When Scotland becomes independent, it's likely that the pound will sink in value, maybe 10 to 15%. If the pound sinks in value and we've got our own free floating currency, then basically we might end up with a hard currency, which would mean that it's 10 to 15% more expensive to buy from us. And therefore they'll stop buying from us, and we can't afford that. So the idea that the Scottish Government has got to explain what they're thinking is that they want maximum stability, so that your pensions that are paid in sterling, from your private pensions and your company pensions that are paid in sterling from headquarter businesses, are worth the same value the day after independence as they were before, which is if you keep the same currency. That it means that your trade, that a product purchased from across the border or sold across the border, is the same value the day after independence. If there's a big currency difference, then they might start looking elsewhere for it. So they're talking about businesses and pensioners, two groups of people that need to be convinced of independence, are convinced by using the same currency that the UK has, at least for a transition period. But my view is that we should possibly do that, but at the point that it becomes significantly beneficial to actually say, no, as of right now, we can actually launch our own currency and use the full monetary policy suite of tools, then it becomes hugely beneficial for us, but maybe not straight away. And so there's still an argument, there's still a discussion to be held on that. But nationalistic thinking, who don't look at the big picture of the economy, say, wouldn't it be great to have our own currency, a Scottish pound? Yes, it would be, but there are practicalities, there are workings within workings, machines within machines, cogs moving against one another, and you've got to understand the whole picture to understand that the safest route is for a period. It might be a year, it might be 2 years, I doubt it'd be 5, but it might be 3 years, etc., of using the same currency could make sense. But they could also come to us and say, I'll tell you what, that currency union you suggested in 2014 is a really good idea. And we'll go, well, make us an offer, 5-year currency union. I'm pragmatic about this, and I'm not nationalistic about it at all, because I'm an economist. And therefore, I think that's where the Scottish Government's coming from. So in the long run, an independent country should have full control of monetary policy, absolutely 100%. But we don't have right now. And moving towards getting that might be beneficial for the economy, might be beneficial for society to move towards it more slowly than just saying on day one we're doing it.
Thanks, Gordon. I'm sure there's quite a few folk in here that would like to continue on that point, but our time is limited. I'm thinking that Andy Anderson sitting there is for one, but it's very interesting topic. To Mary. Hello, Mary. How are you? Nice.
Hello, Val. Gordon said, people are impatient and want people to be moving for independence now, and we have to obviously wait until the opinion of the electorate moves before we actually go for a referendum. But of course there are things to be dealt with before this will happen, which is answering questions that have occurred either during the Indyref or since, to do with currency, the borders, all the different infrastructures that an independent country has to have. Now, the SNP way back in the day, the Scottish Government way back in the day produced this white paper, which has been basically outdated. The Growth Commission also outdated by now. They haven't worked on anything. As far as I know, they have worked on it, nothing since. They have to actually come up with answers to these questions before we can actually start a campaign about the independence, towards an independence referendum. In the Scottish Independence Convention recently, we had Marco Biaggi speaking to us, and he had been at that point in charge of working towards answering the questions for the independence referendum. But he said all the wee groups that had been set up to do this had all been redeployed to, quote, deal with the COVID crisis, unquote. And shortly after that, of course, we hear that Marco Biaggi himself has gone off and, as far as we know, not been replaced. So, I mean, I'm a very patient person. I've been waiting since 1967 for independence. I don't expect to see it. But what I would like to see is an actual movement in that direction. It's different being in a stalled bus and being in the slow boat to China. I'm happy with the slow boat to China, but the stalled bus, no. I think we should come up with some answers to this. And there have been all these academic groups from Commonweal, Scottish Independence Convention, and of course Believe in Scotland, dealing with these answers, coming up with answers to the questions. The Scottish Government does not appear to be coordinating with this at all or paying any attention to it. And I just want to know how we can actually get them to get their attention on it, because the COVID crisis is going to be with us for the rest of our lives, one way or another. It's an endemic. It's not just a pandemic. So we will always be able to say there's still a bit of COVID out there and we have to focus on this. So how do we actually get them to concentrate on the issues that have to be answered before we go into the independence referendum? Because that's what makes people think they're not serious about it. Okay, said enough, over to you.
Great. I'm not sure which of those 15 question type statements I need to deal with first, but no, in general, Mary, I think I do think you're making some very good points there, and I do understand the frustration as well. One of the things that I said before is that the SNP isn't that good at communicating with the Yes movement, and I think that's partly to blame. I know certain people within the SNP hierarchy have been thinking along these lines, have been having these conversations, because I've been having conversations with them about it. And I know that some things are a lot more advanced in terms of the thinking than some people think. And I know there are other areas where they just haven't got round to looking at it, and they should have done. They should have done by now. It is a little bit slow, even for a gradualist, if you like the term, like myself. But in terms of what do I see as the key movement? Well, the key signs of movement are that even after Holyrood, Nicola is talking up the fact that we're now going to win independence and that there is going to be a referendum. She's committed to that. And as I said before, her career depends, or her legacy depends on delivering a referendum and winning it. And she knows that. and I have had conversations with her about when to pick the date, and she's not that worried about it. She thinks, she didn't say when, but she, this is also a while ago as well. Not that recently, but I know the issues that she's told me the issues that she's facing, and also quite enjoying watching the opposition tear themselves in knots and Brexit, etc., and just waiting for the right moment to pounce. And that's her sort of attitude to that. In terms of the move that Kate Forbes, who obviously has been doing, I think, a sterling job of finance, has taken over economy as well, and they've put everything in the same basket. The tremendous amount of trust that's been put in Kate Forbes, and with her putting Wellbeing Economy in her job title, and also, I think that's clearly a move that Kate Forbes is going to be putting the economic case for independence together, right? So I think that's now who's been put in charge of thinking about that. That has not been spelled out to me that as clearly as I'm saying it to you, but that is my reading of the situation and multiple conversations that I've had. The next thing that I would say to you is that in terms of the SNP, in terms of their approach to this next referendum, how could they actually figure out what the economic approach is during COVID and Brexit and the response to Brexit? It's made it hugely complicated. They've also written this form of white paper, which has a lot of detail in there about the structures, etc. But we want to get away from answering questions about structures and answering questions about GERS, and we want to get on to answering questions about what we see an independent Scotland looking like. What is the dream, if it is a dream, and how do we make that dream a reality? And have those conversations rather than have somebody go, GERS says this. Because I'd like to be able to say, as we all would, when someone asks me, but GERS says you've got this. We say, well, yeah, GERS is Scotland in the United Kingdom, and as part of the United Kingdom, our economy isn't performing very well. Thank you very much for pointing that out. But what we're going to do is this, right? And I think that the change within the cabinet to put Kate in charge is showing that they put a more progressive person in place and given that person the responsibility. I'm noticing in some of the other things they're doing in terms of the Fairness and Equality Commission, actually talking about actually saying what the pension should be in an independent Scotland. It's too low, but it's higher than the UK's. So I think the fact that they're actually now starting to talk about pension in independent Scotland, all of these things are signs that they're going in the right direction. Is it fast enough for people who sit at number 10 on that scale of commitment to independence? No, it's not. They're never going to be happy with it, right? I appreciate, I'm a 10, but I'm a gradualist 10. And I'm a pragmatic 10. I understand why we're moving at the pace we are, because we can only move at the pace of the undecided. And right now, the undecided do not want a referendum this year. They don't want it during COVID. And I agree that COVID could well stay with us. It could well be part of our life ongoing, but hopefully it's not going to result in lockdowns. It's just going to be something like seasonal flu for the old folks, but it will be seasonal flu for everybody. And, so there will be ongoing inoculations, these sort of things. There comes a point where people go, right, now we have to move on. And that will not be this year, it will be next year. And so, from next year, the Yes campaign will be in full effect, and the SNP will have its policies in place later next year, because it will be declaring a referendum either later next year or the year before. And by declaring, I mean saying there's going to be one and starting to name a date. So it doesn't necessarily mean the referendum will be next year, but you have to, if we're going to go in May, you have to say it before Christmas, for instance. So that's where we're at. And I'm completely convinced that there is going to be a referendum. And if Nicola Sturgeon were to say, no, I support devolution and I've gone off independence, then I'd be the first person to call for her head. But I know that's fantasy land. It's not going to happen, because if you cut Nicola Sturgeon in two, she'd like rock, right? It'd have independence written in small lettering right in her core. That's who she is. It's what she stands for. And so people shouldn't actually, it's fair enough to say you don't think she's going as fast as you'd like her to, but to say that she doesn't believe in independence just doesn't compute in my view. So hopefully, Mary, that is a quite a long answer to quite a long question, and it gives you some hope.
Sorry, I never said it was too slow for me. That's not a problem. I don't expect an independence referendum myself this year, next year, or the year following either. And I don't expect Nicola Sturgeon to say.
I do.
Well, okay, I don't expect Nicola Sturgeon to say she's happy with devolution either, but what I expect is to be kind of promised an independence referendum again and again and again, but without the work prep that we have to see prepared for that independence referendum, which tells me that it's maybe not going to happen and we'll just slide on like this. What I'm worried about is no movement, not slow movement.
My point is, Mary, they are starting to do the work and they're under tremendous pressure from us and will continue to be under tremendous pressure from us to do the work and to work with us on the wellbeing economy.
Keep up the pressure.
We will lobby. We will.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And we started with Geraldine introducing Gordon. Can we finish with Geraldine as well?
Gordon, it will be quick but slightly two-pronged. If you had to stake next month's salary on it, or all the money we've just raised for Believe in Scotland in the campaign, what date do you think you would put your money on for the Indyref?
Autumn 23.
Autumn 23.
September, October 23.
Okay, and supposing now, if this has been asked while I was looking for the fantasy hands, I apologise. What if Boris Johnson calls a general election before that? What impact is that likely to have on Indyref too, for good or for bad?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a good question because actually I think he will. He's got rid of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. He's pulling away in the polls. He's winning in Hartlepool. And, you know, I'm from Hexham in Northumberland and I've been to Hartlepool. I played hockey in Hartlepool. And let me tell you now, the idea that Hartlepool has a Conservative MP, every time I say it, makes me go, no, wait, check. Are you right? Are you actually right? Do they? You know, I'll have to look it up again. No, they do. You know, it's just incredible. To see that. So I suspect he will at some point call a general election, an early general election. There are a couple of issues around that. Having been caught with that problem before, Nicola Sturgeon is not going to make an announcement for a date and then allow Boris to jump in. She's going to wait until she thinks she's clear of that situation. And she's going to wait until all the policies and ideas are in place, so that if a general election were dumped in our laps after we'd called a referendum, that we'd be able to fight that election on the basis of independence because we're ready. So again, there's going to be delays along those lines. What impact would it have? I think an absolute dominance of a Boris Johnson government, which I predicted a Boris Johnson government in 2014, and everyone said, oh no, he's a clown, he'll never even lead the party. And to me, it was an obvious direction he was going in. But to actually see him win another 5-year term and an even bigger majority, which is a significantly bigger majority, which is what polling is saying right now, would be good for independence because a lot of Labour voters would switch. So there's an upside and a downside to that. What I would imagine will happen though is that Nicola Sturgeon will get all of the ducks in a row and all the policies written, all those sort of things, and then she'll give us a very quick, less than 6-month run-in to a referendum, having upped the ante before that. Which is why it's never been more important for campaigns like Believe in Scotland to be getting the information out there, to be campaigning, to support the grassroots movements, to get street work done, to have a million conversations, a million sensible conversations, non-judgmental conversations about independence with people, to let them realise that independence is normal. Because when it comes, we're not going to have a 2-year run-in like we did last time to have those conversations. We've got to be ready. And our big advantage, our huge advantage, is that we've got people. We've got 100,000 people willing to march. We've maybe got 50,000 people willing to drop leaflets, and 20,000 or more willing to canvass and knock doors. And, you know, you actually think about that. You actually think about, I mean, Believe in Scotland's combined Facebook followers of Believe in Scotland and Business for Scotland, etc., is more than 200,000 people. You know, so we can get messages out instantly through social media, etc. That's our big advantage. We're never going to be able to outspend the opposition when billionaire landowners can just throw in, here's a £5 million donation. We're never going to get that, you know. And so basically, we need COVID to have cleared, and we need a clear run at it. And we need people to have gone on holiday and relax and not be so stressed as well, which they're going to do next summer, in particular, and later this year. And we need to get clear of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. We need to get clear of the council elections in May next year. We need to get clear of obviously the Euros, the Olympics. If we try to do it this year, every single Scottish athlete that even qualified for a final would be interviewed live on TV and asked if they got helped by the British Federation, and every single gold medal winner will be on every billboard, just like Philip was. We don't want to give them these opportunities. We want to get our ducks in a row and pick the best time, and the best time is probably to try for a May 23, to then go to court with Boris Johnson to win and then hold it in late 23, in September, October 23. And the reason for that is, if we are going to wait until 24 for the general election, then if we win the referendum and there is no acceptance of that victory from Westminster, then we don't ask for another referendum or a mandate for another referendum. What happens in 24 is that it is a UDI referendum, because only after all democratic routes have been exhausted will the international community accept UDI. And the best way to get them to accept UDI is to win a majority in the elections to the parliament that controls the constitution. And that is the road that we are on. So it will be somewhere along that road, wherever benefits us most tactically to do it. And if you're thinking, is Gordon just making this up, or is Gordon someone that might actually know and be trusted? I'll let you decide that.
I'm sure there's nobody that thinks that. Well, that's a great note, a really positive note. And
no one thinks I'm someone to be trusted. Okay.
Your organisation is very well known for its positivity. Can I just ask everyone to unmute themselves? Because I'd like to thank everyone who's attended tonight. In particular, I'd like to ask all the people who submitted questions, very interesting questions. But if everyone unmutes themselves, I'd like to thank most of all our very informative and knowledgeable speaker, Gordon MacIntyre Kemp, who works tirelessly, and could we just all put our hands together in the traditional way. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gordon.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it anytime.
You're listening to Indyliveradio. My name's Valerie Gold, and this has been the Yes Group Spotlight Monday show. Here at Indyliveradio, we'd like to thank Yes Glasgow North West for allowing us to broadcast their meeting, which took place in June, and especially, of course, we'd like to thank Gordon MacIntyre Kemp on behalf of Yes Glasgow North West as well, for giving up his time and answering the questions of all the people who were involved. And we wish Believe in Scotland all the very best with their campaigns, billboards and leaflets, and all the different campaign techniques that they are taking forward.
Indyliveradio.